Alright, welcome back to the channel. Welcome if you're new. So I've been playing some vintage Singleton recently, as well as a certain amount of Commander. And for those of you who are mostly interested in Commander, I will bring up the Bullsot deck list with all changes at the end of the video. So you can stick around for that or fast forward if you don't care about this vintage Singleton format that I'm trying to establish for the interested. But as a reminder, it's vintage banned list, which would include Chaos Orb if you are playing offline. You can also play that. However, it's not allowed online, so I can't play it online. And it's a 100-card minimum deck. So very simple rules, but it makes for a very fun and dynamic format. Unfortunately, most of my playtesting has been against actual vintage decks, but I still get good games. It's just that sometimes I don't. For example, if my opponent sits down with a vintage Bazaar of Baghdad deck, I go ahead and just concede the match. There's no point. Absolutely not something I'm equipped to even remotely try to deal with, and not a deck that would exist in a format like this anyway. I mean, Bazaar is legal, but 4 Bazaars and infinite delve cards and stuff, it's totally different ball wax, narcomoebas and all that. So when I have those matchups, I just go ahead and could scoop and move on and look for a match where I can play an interactive game with my opponent. But I do find those sometimes, and it makes for very fun and interesting magic. With the current version of the deck, what I've done is I went ahead and actually removed all the white from the deck, and I made it pure Grixis and played it that way for a while. And I was interested in, I felt like that offered, at first I played pure Esper actually, so I played it that way for a while, no red. And then I played pure Grixis, no white. And then between the two, I decided that the strongest cards from each color might be splashable lightly, and I ended up with this combination of the two, and I forgot what the color combination is here, but basically the no green deck. And I gotta say, it's really fun to play and does some really amazing things. The sideboard is very streamlined to fight against. Well, there's quite a few cards in the sideboard dedicated to fighting against blue. A couple anti-red cards, so just a couple cards here for anti-red or anti-red blue, and up to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cards that you can sideboard in against blue. Although you don't necessarily have to look at Blast Miner, Miner, and Tinkerer as anti-blue cards. They could be good against others. I'm not even 100% sure on these three cards. Back in the day, these cards were great, but due to the existence of Orcish Bowmasters and the fact that there's 4 of in the formats that I'm playing in most of my testing, the Blast Miner seems all right. Sorry, the Miner seems all right because it's a 1/2, and the Tinkerer seems fine because it's a 1/2, but the Blast Miner might not be. In Vintage now, you really have to look at 1 toughness and say, if this doesn't get me value right away, I may not be able to play this card if it has 1 toughness, because of how many Orcish Bowmasters there are. But I wanted to build my sideboard for the actual Singleton format that I'm playing, and not really, I have cards in here that are good against basically my format as well as the vintage proper format, so it should be all right. And then these 4 cards here are just a selection of cards that I might like to search out with Karn. The weakest of them being Liquid Metal Torque, which is a card that kind of feels like it should be in the main deck or not at all. But I don't exactly know what to do with that last slot in my sideboard, so I'm leaving it alone. I did have the card Gloom, and for those of you who aren't familiar, you're missing out on a banger. Gloom is an old school card, beta, right? Gloom says white spells cost 3 more to cast, and activated abilities of white enchantments cost 3 more to activate. So it's just absolutely monstrous against white, 4 mana Swords to Plowshares, right? So when it was pure Grixis, I had Gloom in the sideboard as well. When it was pure Esper, I had Chill, which is a 2 mana Gloom that affects red, but only hits it for a 2 cost increase, and only hits spells, doesn't hit enchantments. The enchantment thing is kind of irrelevant most of the time anyway. It's really the making spells cost more thing that's really cool. And maybe it would be correct to put Gloom in my board against a heavy white deck, and I could board out a handful of white spells, maybe even keep a few of the cheap ones, and maybe just cut like Time Reveler or something and make it a Gloom. That could be correct, but for now, I'm not doing that. I decided I didn't want to sideboard anything that actually damages me. Just everything's just pure and clean. So Voltaic Key's in there, so Karn can go ahead and fetch it if you have the Time Vault, but you don't have the key, and you have no way to get your key out of your deck. You have a secondary one that you can grab from the sideboard using Karn. Mycosynth Lattice is the classic lockdown with Karn that turns everything into artifacts. And then, of course, with Karn, they can't use artifacts, so they just can't tap for mana or really do much of anything. Jittei's in there because there are times when Jittei's extremely good. I have enough creatures. I have 14 creatures in this deck, so there's plenty of support for Jittei. But I don't feel like it's quite good enough for Vintage most of the time. However, because of could be board states where it's really good, or I might play against like a green deck or something. I have it in the sideboard. This is a card I'll happily sideboard in if I think it's like good in games 2 and 3. That is incidentally the other difference between this and Commander is that you have sideboards and you play 2 out of 3. So anyway, and then Torque is just there because with Karn you can turn off target permanent, basically anything with an activation cost, if you don't have enough mana to Lattice. And you can Karn and grab the Torque, play your 5th land drop, cast the Torque, and then maybe and then grab the Lattice, and then on the next turn play the Lattice. So it's kind of like helps out with that. Other than that, I don't think too much explanation is required, and we should just get into the game. So let's take a look at that. And like I said, I'll bring up the Commander deck as well at the end for those of you who want to stick around for that. So I only had a few games today. In the last 7, let's look at specifically Vintage. I played a number, and here you can see, you know, 2 wins, like won a match, lost, won a match, won, lost. Like, this is a Vintage Singleton deck, and I'm facing actual full power Vintage cards. Excuse me. I have to apologize for that. The allergies are driving me crazy today. So anyway, I feel like it's very, very awesome that this deck is doing as well as it's doing, all things considered. So I thought I'd run through some games, and I figured it made most sense to just run through the games from today rather than the last 7, just because the games from today are most representative of the deck in its current state. So I'll hit up this game that I lost, and you can see how I lost. Then we'll take a look at these other 2 that I won, which are really pretty fun. And you can see I could have won the match. I went 1-2 instead of, I didn't go 0-2. So here I've got a hand that, you know, very clearly I cannot mulligan a hand with turn 1 Library of Alexandria, but I am going first, so I don't get to draw a card until my next turn. It might be too slow for Vintage, but my deck is Singleton, and like I'm not going to throw away a hand with that much potential just because, you know, my opponents probably are going to do ridiculous stuff and it might not work. Because there's always a chance that my opponent goes, you know, first turn underground, see, go, and all of a sudden I've got some game, so, or whatever. So I decided to keep, and I'm just going to run out the library, and we'll see what happens. And, I mean, the fact that I have Hull Breacher is really nice. My opponent therapies me, misses, and Pithing Needle's my library. Damn it. I was getting real happy there for a moment. I get a Spell Snare. I'm going to just go ahead and play the Zernor because I'm figuring this looks like a Sinkhole Wasteland deck. So seeing the Spell Snare is pretty nice, so I'm not going to ponder here. I'm also, of course, concerned about that card, which is everywhere in Vintage. Everywhere in Vintage. They take my Hull Breacher away with a therapy. Okay, Mana Leak means don't ponder. Just play it cool. Wait. Thoughtseize, yeah, I got a Mana Leak that, unfortunately. There's no point in giving them information. They can't use the towers. I countered the orcs. So, hey, Baby Jace, this is really good. Maybe I can get something going with this. My opponent plays the weirdest card I've ever seen in Vintage. I have never... What in the hell is this? Farika's Libation. Sacrifice a creature or an enchantment. So this is a black way to kill enchantments. I guess that's actually interesting. It's very funny to see in a Vintage deck. But I think it might... It's possible that it has a place in the Bullseye deck because of just being able to kill enchantments. I don't know. I'm going to keep it in mind, though. Anyway, unfortunately, though, it means that I have to kill my Jace, which means I don't have anything going here. I'm going to go ahead and ponder finally. I do see a Saga, and Saga gives me a possible way into this game if my opponent isn't doing anything too crazy. I can, in a couple turns, I can grab a Lotus, use Lotus to grab Tez, use Tez to grab the Time Vault, and then win and start untapping it with Tezzeret. So maybe. All right, Fire and Ice is good. It means I don't die to Orcs. I'm wondering if this is... I don't remember drawing a Fire and Ice here. I'm hoping this isn't a bugged game. I do remember all this happening, though, so maybe not. Opponent's down to 2 cards in hand, which is nice. I'm going to go ahead and, Saga. And my creature will be slightly too big for Orcs to kill, thanks to the Zern Orb in play, which is nice. I still had Torque in the main during this game, as you can see. So I'm going to float some mana, grab a Lotus, and do the thing. I'm going to Yogg-Will, play the Lotus, play the Saga once again, sack the Lotus, run out Tezzeret. Tezzeret, grab the Vault. And the reason that I did, and then replay the Jace from the graveyard and pass with the Construct. And I'm going to leave the Construct on tap. I don't want him to flash out Orcs and then kill Tezzeret by attacking. It just doesn't sound good to me. Opponent has Collective Brutality, kills the Jace again, takes Muddle out of my hand, plays a Murderous Rider. What is this Vintage deck? Anyway, plays a Murderous Rider, and I think they were like, realized that they were screwed, because this is so weird. So if my opponent had correctly played the Murderous Rider, they would have killed the Tezzeret, and then I can't untap the Vault. And the Urza Saga goes to 2, which means I get to make another big threat and start attacking my opponent's face. But they have a Wasteland, so they can kill the Saga again, which means that I can't use the Saga to search up Manifold Key as an alternate route to victory with the Time Vault. So I think this was just like a Magic Online misplay. I don't feel like the opponent was really in good shape, even if they had gotten the Rider to correctly kill Tezzeret, but this screw up was just atrocious, right? I just untap, and then Tezzeret untaps Time Vault, and I take infinite turns for the rest of the game. In the other 2 games, they just ripped me to pieces with discard. So I made possibly a questionable play here. Again, I'm going to keep this hand, right? Looks great. My opponent has just a stone cold nuts start, unfortunately. I have a pretty darn good one myself. I decided to actually dump the Vault because I was planning on... I knew Library wasn't going to... I knew I was either going to get hit by discard or Wasteland, so I was not going to waste the mana to sit on Library there. So I went ahead and played the Time Vault, but that was just because I'm playing against somebody who's running a full-on 4 of everything Vintage deck. If I was playing against like a Singleton, I would have held the Time Vault and then prepared to use the Library again. But here, I decided Laylee is probably the best. Oh, no. Sorry. Let me pause. So my opponent puked out a bunch of mana and Imperial Sealed. So I was like, this is great. I'm going to swing in with Ragavan and take whatever the heck is on top of their library. And that just counter spells the Imperial Seal. And if it's something I can play, even better. And once again, this stupid Farika's Libation completely like oses me. I'm like, what in the hell am I facing? Unfortunately, my opponent tutored for Karn and has a Wasteland, but I can kill Karn if I can get like 3 mana. They play a Graph Digger's Cage I don't care about at all. So I've got Karakas. I'm opponent Demonic Tutors. My hope, and Demonic Tutors for Sensei's Divining Top? Oh no, Wasteland. Oh no, they just Karn the Mox Emerald. Yeah, No, I don't know what they demonic tutored for. It looks like they tutored for top, which is just wild. Or maybe they tutored for the cage. I don't know. But I'm 1 mana away from Lelia, like getting in and just totally fixing this game. And I'm going to save time. I never draw another land. This is it. I just sit on these 2 lands for the whole game. Can't do anything. I force a negation. Opponent gets Karn to get Crucible out of their sideboard, and then I force a negation it, and then I just lose. I just sit under Karn and can't. I couldn't draw a 3rd land, and I just kept drawing 3 drops. It was really frustrating, to be honest. So anyway, game 3. I feel like this is fine because I can go turn 1 Manifold Key, turn 2 Grim Monolith, untap the key, slam Karn down, and then I can win. Unless, my opponent does vintage stuff and I lose. That's basically it. So, all right. So that was, an unfortunate. I mean, I'm playing against vintage mono black. I should lose, right? But never know. I mean, I did get to 1, and I was very close to winning the others, to be honest. All right. So moving into my next opponent, I'm playing against Florida Legacy Club here. I imagine with a name like that, they might enjoy playing the Singleton format more than they are playing the pure vintage format. And I have a great start here. Got mana and cards. This is now with the white added in, as you can see. My opponent goes Cavern of Souls into Chrome Mox, Imprinting Solitude, casting Thalia. So I'm going to go ahead and just make sure I hit my land drops here and just tithe. I'm not going to worry about trying to get a 2-for-1 on that. I've got enough mana in my hand. And then I'm going to immediately go into Skydiver that Chrome Mox. Yum, yum. Thalia might not work out as well for my opponent as it is for me. Opponent then follows up with turn 2 City of Traders, Simeon Spirit Guide into Seasoned Dungeoneer. Amazing. They now have the initiative. So I go ahead and steal it back. Grab myself my basic island. Play a Spellseeker thanks to the mana from their Chrome Mox, and then immediately just plow that Seasoned Dungeoneer. I don't want to screw with that at all. My opponent runs out 4 mana and slams Seasoned Dungeoneer number 2. See, this is actually a game-winning play in Vintage quite often because Thalia suppresses combo and nobody has creatures for Seasoned Dungeoneer. Anyway, they forge it up to a 5/6, but unfortunately for them, I've got Teferi. I steal the initiative back and then forge Spellseeker into a 3/3. And they've lost initiative a second time. I also have Force of Will ready to go, but they still have that Cavern of Souls, so I can't Force of Will if they play a human. Fortunately for me, they don't. They play Archon of Emeria, so yeah, I'm just going to pay 1 mana and Force of Will that thing. I know the last card is Seasoned Dungeoneer. With initiative, I goad their Thalia, forcing it to attack. Plus up to Fairy on Brick on my draw, but I'm just going to sit with both blockers back in case they have like a plow off the top. They don't. They just get down a Seasoned Dungeoneer and once again take initiative. They trap, so they blast me for 5 damage. I'm at 7 now. But they have to attack with Thalia, which is lovely. So die Thalia, thank you. Which means that I can swing in and take initiative, and I have a chump blocker if I want it. I rip Ancestral off the top into Jace, bouncing their guy, smashing, taking initiative back. And with that, I choose to draw a card off of it. Initiative's just bonkers. Again, my opponent comes down with an uncounterable Seasoned Dungeoneer, so I'm not going to count it. They now get to go. I'm going to go ahead and ponder in response, because remember, I have Teferi plussed up. I shuffle away a Soul Ring and draw a Soul Ring. Magic Online Bug, maybe? Anyway, they go ahead and draw a card off the archive, so they're a turn behind me on initiative, despite being the ones to get this party started. And I'm going to go ahead and just Jace into some extra cards here. And Marsh Flats, and then I go ahead and steal the initiative and draw 10, sneak a Hull Breacher into play, who's now a 6/5, cast a Spellseeker, cast Time Walk, cast Opposition Agents, and kill my opponent. Pretty awesome game against a pretty harsh deck, honestly. And then game 2. Adding the white was extremely good for me, obviously. And look at this beautiful hand. But my opponent's got 4 mana. And I'm like, please don't be Karn. It's not Karn, but Trinisphere. Okay. So they are at least missing white mana, it seems. They tap for 4. I'm like, please don't be Karn. No, it's a Chrome Mox into an Anointed Peacekeeper. I'm going to pause it just so I can read this thing. So, Anointed Peacekeeper. You look at an opponent's hand, choose a card name. It's a 3/3 with Vigilance. Spells your opponent's cast with the chosen name or activated abilities of the chosen name cost 2 more. So 2 more to cast, 2 more to activate for the card that they named. So they named Dak Faden, which means he costs 5 mana to play and 2 mana to activate, unless this thing is dealt with. So anyway, for my turn, I was patient and I get my Saga out on this turn so that I can potentially get a robot on the next turn. It's painful being so slow at the Saga development, but under a Trinisphere, it just seemed to make sense. Still can't force a will yet and take 3 points of beatdown, but there's not much else going on over there. I'm going to go ahead and play a land and pass, because now I can force a will or mana drain. So when he goes for a nice big juicy spell, I'm like, yum, feed me. Feed me, Seymour. I will mana drain that. Take some damage before Cavern of Souls shows up to make that not so fun. All right, so with some of the mana, I'm going to go ahead and make a robot. Then we're going to go and trigger the Saga. Unfortunately, I have both Lotus and Soul Ring, but I can get a key, and I can untap my Soul Ring and use the mana floating to cast my Black Lotus, which means I can force a will here. And I made my construct a 4/4, which is really nice. And I did not draw. No, I did. Yeah, I drew Time Vault off the top. I got Time Vault. And yeah, that's it. It's like instant death for my opponent. They don't have a solution. They don't have a Karn. And they don't get to play anymore. Although, to be honest, I was in great shape, right? If my opponent didn't, like, if that wasn't the play, I was considering whether or not I wanted to play a 3-mana Demonic Tutor and then, like, get this off the board, or, like, slam a Narset. And then, remember, I can Manifold Key the Soul Ring, too. So I was thinking, like, 3-mana Demonic Tutor, pass, and then be ready for a Force Will, and then Narset pass into Time Twister, which would be enough. Or Hull Breacher into Time Twister, something like that, right? That's what I was thinking, but yeah. Vultures showed up to ruin my opponent's day. And then I had these games against Snappy X, who probably isn't happy losing to a Singleton deck with the deck that they're playing, but I want to show you how savage this deck can actually be. So I get first turn Mox into Inti. This is very scary, believe it or not. It is also safe from Orcs. So my opponent Vampiric Tutors, probably for Orcs. Oh, for Ancestral, rather. So they're at 17, and this is key, right? On my turn, Lelia hits. I swing in. We get all kinds of lovely triggers. So let me see if I can explain what's going on. All right. So my 2/2 and my 2/2 attack. Lelia exiles a card on the top of my library, says I can play it till the end of the turn. I hit Steam Vents or Tithe with Lelia. That specifically, I hit Steam Vents. Okay, so that makes Lelia 3/3. Inti triggers saying whenever you attack, you may discard a card. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. It gains Trample. And when you discard one or more, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until your next end step. So I discard Marsh Flats. And Lelia then puts a +1/+1 counter on itself. In this case, I chose itself. And gets Trample. But because I discarded a card to Lelia, I then get to exile the top card of my library. So Inti then exiles Tithe. As you can see, it's highlighting to the Tithe that exiled. Which means that since I exiled a card, Lelia gets a +1/+1 counter because I just exiled something. And so my 2/2s are suddenly a 3/3 and a 4/4, and my opponent takes 7. My opponent is now at 10. And guess what happens next turn if they don't find a solution? I attack for 10 because I get +3/+3 with every swing. And I rip Ragavan off the top. Like, just how gross. But I don't swing in because I'm concerned. I'm hoping to just draw a counter spell here. And then if my opponent has any tricks, I'll just play the counter out of the exile zone and win. So I discard Fabricate. I now have a 6/6 and a 4/4 with Trample. Opponent flashes out Bowmasters, which I'm fine. You can jump. Takes 4. My main concern now, I was thinking what I would do from there is cast Yawgmoth's Will and then replay Marsh Flats and sack it to go get Badlands and then cast Ragavan. which would trigger Lelia, by the way, because of the Yawgmoth's Will exiling a card. But I decided against, and the reason I decided against is I figured the only way, not the only way, but the most likely way that I'm going to lose the game here is my opponent's going to draw and they're going to time twister. And when they time twister, Orcish Bowmasters is going to turn into a machine gun. It is going to gun down, and then play, whatever they get, maybe some fast mana, another Bowmasters, who knows what, and then find a way to deal with this Inti or whatever, right? They'll probably gun down the Lelia, ping this for 1, and then, who knows, take it from there. Maybe they just find Fatal Push or something. So with that in mind, I decided rather than just getting, a Marsh Flats and an extra Ragavan who just gets shot with the extra shot from the Bowmasters if they time twister, I would just do nothing and sit on the Hull Breacher. And that way, if my opponent time twisters here, they draw no cards. I get boatloads of mana. Sure, they get to shoot things with Bowmasters, but that'll be the last thing they get to do for the game because I'll have no cards in hand to my 7 and 10 mana, right? So I just sit on the Hull Breacher. And my opponent has nothing. So I'm going to flash it out end of turn. Just to, maybe they've got another trick or whatever. Let's go ahead and push them. Let's pressure them. And then this turn I was going to go ahead and, depending if I drew, say a land or whatever, I'd go ahead and just play Copy Artifact on Mox Pearl, and then Ragavan with Dash, and swing in with the whole team, and then draw and discard my land. Or possibly Ragavan with Dash, swing in, discard, and just hope to find a counterspell to, make sure that if they have a trick, I can win that way. But as it turns out, my opponent has nada. So we get to go into game 2. And now I get to sideboard against a blue deck. And so I bring in all the goodies, which is against the white deck, I had no sideboard at all. I just basically had to fight him with what I had. But against the blue deck, I bring in Flusterstorm, Miscast, Stifle. Basically, I bring in this. I decided this was the play. I can't remember if I may have left the minor out and just brought in these two because of the orcs. I may have brought these in, but I don't think so. I think I just brought in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Stifle, great because it stops fetchlands, wasteland, and the orc trigger as well. ETB trigger or a single version of the orc trigger if possibly. I've also got answers for orcs built into the deck, baked into the cake. But and then I took out so for these 6, and then I took out Balance. I took out Zern Orb. I took out Mind Twist, I believe. I took out 1 toughness, not as strong creature. I didn't really see any artifacts. I took out, I didn't bring in the Blast Miner. I took out this guy and my other anti-artifact. I took out Fairy Mastermind, and I took out Thieving Skydiver, I think. So basically, I took out 1 toughness creatures who deal with artifacts or cards. I took out Mind Twist, seemed a little slow, Zernor Balance, and I just brought in cheap anti-blue stuff. So that was my sideboard. And we'll go into game 2. I would have talked sideboards on the white deck, but like I said, I had nothing to bring in against them whatsoever. So let's sort the color again. And we'll go to game 2, and we'll see how my sideboard did against Snappy X Vintage deck. Okay, here we go. So I have a really nice hand, provided my opponent doesn't just go nuts on turn 1, but my opponent mulligans to 4 and plays a Underground Sea. I mean, and at that point I'm thinking, you're down to 4 cards in hand, and I've got 2 of them covered. So I'm feeling pretty good about this game. And yeah, my opponent misses a land drop, and I'm feeling like I can't lose here as long as I don't misplay. So a Mox Sapphire off the top just makes things so much easier. I'm going to sit on Fluster plus Mana Drain here. And yeah, feeling like it's time to maybe Impulse very soon. But I don't even want to sack my fetches just yet. I'm just playing it safe. I'm in no rush whatsoever. Now I have mana to Impulse and still cast 3 counter spells, as a matter of fact. I Impulse into Merchant Scroll, which is lovely. So now I'll go ahead and fetch. We'll test the waters. All right. I don't see any, no punish there. Misdirection's beautiful to see off the top because, you know, it's ancestral. It forces their ancestral to target me or counters one of their counters. I'm going to go ahead and start a counter war with them during upkeep by ancestral, so I'm pretty sure it's going off. But instead, my opponent forced a wills here, so I'm going to play the uncounterable as I believe it is, Flusterstorm here. Turns out, so I played ancestral and fluster. My opponent forces the ancestral. I go ahead and mana drain, and my opponent mind break traps, which hits all of the copies of Flusterstorm. Really cool. And I can't misdirect the mind break trap because misdirection can only change the targets of something with a single target. This is a little risky. My opponent only has one card in hand. I let my guard down for a moment. If my opponent has Ancestral Recall, they're right back in the game, but I went ahead and got the One Ring. Well, I can misdirect that, but if they had Orcish Bowmasters, they're in the game, because then the One Ring starts to look pretty crappy here, but I feel good about it, and yeah, it works out. I go ahead and draw, and my opponent misses a land, and that is it. They might have been holding Bowmasters this whole game, but they never got to it. And from there, my opponent just scoops it up. Doesn't want to see any more One Ring action. And, of course, it's not going to matter because they're not resolving much. I mean, I've got Stifle for their next fetch land or Wasteland. I've got Misdirection for Ancestral Recall. I've got Mana Leak for Orcs. This game's definitely over. Now I just ride the One Ring all the way home. So, pretty cool stuff. Very fun and satisfying when you can beat vintage decks with your Singleton deck. And I really hope that these videos interest you and make you want to give the format a try. It's super fun. It's super interesting. It's very interactive. And honestly, when I was playtesting the Singleton versus Singleton battles, the games were way more fun. Like the games against Vintage are very linear because all their decks just do, you know, super narrow things. But man, the games against Singleton was so fun. It was so interesting, super back and forth, a lot of stuff going on. And like I said, there's so many interesting things that you can do here that you can't do in Commander currently. Like, for example, Flash and Channel and, I don't know, Tolarian Academy and Tinker. And I'm not even using Tinker, right? But I could. I'm using Fabricate, you know. So, incidentally, if you're wondering why that is, it's because I'm playing mostly real vintage decks and guest decks with 4 to 8 Force of Wills. 2 for 1ing yourself is not the way to go. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's just a fun format. And if I were, I think, now that I think about it, I will make one adjustment. This is probably the last sideboard card change that I probably should make. I probably should stick Tinker in the sideboard, and then I should stick an anti-aggro card in the sideboard to Tinker for, so that I can bring in Tinker against fast, aggressive decks and just kind of shut them down with this. And of course, this is an artifact too that I can grab with Karn. So more than likely in the future, I'll probably make that change. And I think I'll probably just take the Blast Miner. I mean, I don't want to take the Blast Miner out because for one-on-one, it's probably really good, but it is really weak in... I can probably just cut the Torque. And after that, I don't know. It's really weak. Blast Miner is really weak in an Orcish Bowmaster format, so maybe I just cut that. Yeah, and something like this. This looks pretty good. So this is probably where the sideboard's gonna stay, and that gives me 4 cards that I get to bring in against red instead of 2, right? So now I can bring in these. If I'm playing against a red you're dead style deck, I can bring in these 4 cards here, and then I should be in pretty good shape for the most part. So I think that's the way that I'll go with this. Anyway, I did promise the Commander a quick peek at the Commander deck, so excuse me. Let me go ahead and bring that up. Sneezing, coughing, hiccups. Hopefully I'm not catching something out here. All right, the Bullseye deck. Man, this deck is so freaking streamlined and good. Anyway, this is it for all of you Commander aficionados. Recent changes are that I have gone to 4 Planeswalker removals for cheap. Bitter Triumph, Shieldred's Edict, Angerous Rampage, and Molten Collapse are my 4 Planeswalkers attack vectors. And then I also have the extraordinary Inti, who is just absolutely incredible in this deck. Remember, he triggers whenever you discard. So if you cycle, if you discard because they him you, if you discard to something like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Inti will trigger, which is amazing. And I'm also running Orcish Bowmasters. So the changes are I have Inti, Bowmasters, and Fable all in. I took out the forecasting cost, the mirror. I forgot what it was called, but it was like black, 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 1 sorcery. You could sacrifice a permanent and then tutor for a 4-drop or less and play it for free. The problem I had with the card was that you tutor for a spell and play it, and then your opponent counters it, and you've now lost your tutor, the thing you sacrificed, and you're way behind in tempo, and I don't like that whatsoever. Whereas Fable can just help you dig for it a little bit more and has that nice synergy with Inti and some other cards in the deck. And of course, Fable flipped. The Kiki Jiki absolutely loves copying Orcish Bowmasters, actually, which is kind of nutty. And there's some other funky plays you can do with it, like you can animate your Thran Dynamo with Karn, and then you can copy it with Fable and stuff like that to make tons of mana or whatever. So there's some really cool stuff going on there. But the deck is just a who's who of the most just gross plays that you can make in these colors, minus a few outliers that would show up in another format, but don't necessarily belong in this deck, I don't think. Specifically, Fury and the black version of that, Grief. Fury and Grief are like super oppressive, and I think Fury is even banned in a format. Maybe Grief is too. I think a bunch of those elementals, Fury, Grief, and the white one that I faced in that against that first opponent, are all just like very oppressive in the formats that they exist in. Extremely good cards, but a lot of it has to do with when you're playing a 4 of with 60 cards. There are a bunch of 1 casting cost flicker effects that cause those things to go from a extremely good card to just an obscenely good card. I'm not playing that in here, so here, yeah, they're extremely good, but so is the rest of the deck, and I don't really need them. And in a battle of attrition, I don't like 2-for-1ing myself, so I've opted not to use them. But yeah, deck is phenomenal. Of course, we have another legend that we can, I don't know, tap for mana if we have to. I suppose you can do the same thing with a Fable. Oh no, I'm sorry. I thought that the Reflection Kikijiki was legendary. I guess you can't. I don't know why I thought Fable was like a legendary enchantment. It feels like it should be. But anyway, yeah. So anyway, those are the changes to the Commander deck. Super, super ridiculous deck. Absolutely fun to play. And struggles, if you want to know what it struggles against Minsc and Boo heavily. So if you want to deal with that, you actually have to increase your Planeswalker kill spells. Like you can go up from 4 to 6 to 8 to whatever. But I feel like doing that is a little ridiculous. Minsc should have been banned a long time ago, but it's just a horribly like imbalanced card at 4 mana. Basically, it's a turn 1 play. But that's a whole different conversation, and mostly I just wanted to talk the Vintage Singleton deck and show the Commander deck to those of you who enjoy that about the format. But I highly recommend you take the Singleton format for a spin. Look for me online. Let's get some games. Add me as a friend. Put your screen name in the comments if you like, and tell me you want to play. And let's do this. There's so much more to do than what I'm doing here. This is just one version of how you could play this format. Like I have some ideas for a lot of more, other interesting things. Like imagine an Oath deck with Flash and Channel and Emrakul and all that. Like that sounds really good to me. And maybe like And maybe like what's her name? The green house. Uh, God, I'm not being too descriptive right now. If Magic Online would stop lagging, I will show you what I'm talking about instead of this thing. Not Imperial Archangel. It's a great card, but that's not Atraxa. So like Atraxa, natural order into this thing, draw 10 cards or whatever you end up getting out of it. Like there's definitely a deck there. I think that would be super cool. You also have like show and tell that you can cheat them into play. So there's a ton of stuff going on. Like, in my ideas for what you could do that would be super fun and interesting. I imagine lots of you would have some really cool, interesting ideas for vintage as well. And I'd love to see them. Maybe you just build an Underworld Breach deck with LED and Black Lotus and all the fixings, right? That sounds really good too. I mean, you know, it's Magic's your oyster, I guess, at this point, or something like that. But anyway, that's it. That's all the cajoling I can do for those of you who might be interested in playing. I hope you do. But for the rest of you, thank you very much for watching. For all of you, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.